All right, so hello. It's not quite as friendly as a little room as the other one. No matter. Hopefully you can hear me. Someone asked me earlier why juggling on a high-wire unicycle. It was, a bit of a joke. To try and give a sense of the complexity of putting together a new museum. Now, it's currently a closed, failed museum, and hopefully it's going to be a new museum in a couple of years. The other thing about juggling on a highway unicycle, it's riddled with problems. It's also dangerous and probably stupid. But we shall see in a couple of years. Things will start to develop, hopefully, and we can be open, hopefully, in a couple of years. This is a little list. This is sort of one of those slides where it's my workings out almost, if you remember that from school. But I thought I'd leave it in there. I'm not going to talk about everything. I might touch on things more than others, but it's a little bit of a flavour of where I want to go. And I suppose what I want to start, to take a pick, I sort of want to start with museums of strange places. I've been working in museums all around the world, but predominantly in London, but in lots of them, and they're all strange, and they're all a challenge, and they're always a challenge to engage people, and to find new ways of engaging them, and it never goes away. And sometimes people think it's all about technology. Sometimes it is a little bit about that, but I want to say actually technology is a bit of a pain to some extent. Museums have collections. You see a thing in a museum and there's this lovely vase or a lovely cup or something, and it's made by someone important, and that's very interesting. But it's that's also a bit boring. And lots, particularly provincial museums, they have a label that says it's made by so-and-so, and it doesn't really go any further. But what's interesting about this glass or this cup or this hat or whatever it might be, is that it might have been part of the Spice Island sailing. It might have been at war with somebody. It might have been owned by a king or a queen, or it might have been at the bottom of the sea for 200 years. And those stories, those sort of invisible threads that come off of museum objects, if you can get those stories right and you can tell those stories in such a way that it engages, let's face it, young people, because I'm not the target audience of a museum. I love museums, but getting 20-year-old people into museums is one of the challenges that we're facing in Ramsgate. But one thing that, and we'll come on to the interior of the museum. One thing that's been tried to do in the past, that every single story about every single object in the collection they try and tell. So you've got this absolute cacophony of stories and information, and there's not enough room in the museum, and there's not enough room in people's heads to take it all in, and so it becomes this overwhelming experience that I think is a negative space, particularly for perhaps younger people. I wanted to just, what is heritage? I'm sure people have written books about what is heritage, or university courses. It's a giant subject. For my purposes, what is heritage? What we have inherited from the past to value and enjoy in the present, and to preserve and pass on to future generations, which for me means young people, and have young people interested. And I suppose for me, I was looking for this sort of something that could relate specifically to an individual. And I was trying to find something about me, and I was like, well, what is that about me that there's a piece of heritage? Is there something that's very personal to me that I can see? And I remembered something from my past, and I'm going to show it to you now. I can only describe as it's a piece of wanton vandalism by a 7-year-old. I don't know if anyone, this is just off the cliffs near Harbour, near Liverpool Lawn, where I was born. And at 7 years old, me and a couple of friends, we used to climb on this wall and watch workmen building. I forget what was being built, but 6 or 7 years old, we used to stand on that wall. To our pleasure, one day we got up on there, and it was freshly cemented, within an inch of rendered cement. So of course, we got up there and we started tearing it down, making little cement, snowballs, throwing them across the room. I don't know if you can see that. It said pig up in the corner. I can remember thinking, this is the worst word I know. And probably was. I'm only 6 or 7 years old. Because in 1971 or whatever it was, I'm 5 or 6 years old. It's a piece of vandalism. The police came along. We got held, taken off back to our parents and told off. And I didn't really get into trouble because I was so young. But it wasn't great. Parents weren't impressed. Now, 50 odd years later, it's still there. and it's a bit of my heritage, and my stories, you know, like the sort of imaginary thing. My stories come off of that, and I can remember all sorts of things about my childhood, and this sort of exemplifies what I think museums should be doing. Here's Ramsgate. Lots of you will be familiar with it. The point, Grand Point, the clock tower is right bang in the middle. Well, we mentioned Wilkie Collins earlier. He's one of his. Was it Wellington Crescent? Which is just sort of looks over the harbour. Anyway, the clock house is directly overlooking. Sorry, the clock house is right at the centre of the harbour, right at the centre of Ramsgate activities. And here's the building, and it's a kind of Frankenstein building. It was built in the sort of centerpiece was built in 1817. The two wings were added on slightly later. It's had a multitude of there's been industry in there. I think there's been rope building, rope making. There was instrument making. There was fishing industry. It was just offices for a long time. And the clock tower was built to help give time to the harbour and the shipping industries that were going in and out of the harbour. In 1985, it was turned into a museum, and for me, it kind of looks like a maritime museum. It seems obvious that it should be turned into a maritime museum, and it was in 1985. It opened as a maritime museum, and I think that's the last time it had a coat of paint or it was changed. This is where I guess from a person who was curator of navigational instruments at the Maritime Museum in London. It fills me with horror, but also I like showing these pictures because and I'm not naming names, but it's been neglected fundamentally. It's been closed for a couple of years, and you can see ceilings have fallen down. The middle image is actually one of the object stores, and I don't know if any of you have ever been in a proper museum object store, but they're very precise places. They're very clean, very quiet. It's a bit like being in one of these library rooms. This is an absolute disaster. It's a terrible thing that's happened to the museum. Why it's happened, who knows? I've only been involved in this project for about a year and a half. I was born in Ramsgate. I was living away from Ramsgate for the best part of 20 years, and I came back during COVID. Planned to come back for a couple of months while COVID, disappeared. Didn't quite disappear, and I'm still around. And anyway, so I went back to see my old museum and discovered that it was in this terrible state of disrepair. Just the thing that I found most upsetting is just the edge of a painting. You can see that's about an 8-foot painting. It's in the cellar of the building, and it's covered in a glaze of water because there's the building leaks. And of course, if your instinct is to let's rescue it, let's bring it upstairs and put it in the warm. And I know just enough to know about painting conservation that if I bring it upstairs and dry it out, probably all the paint's going to drop off. It's about 150 years old, that painting, and so at the moment we're leaving it there until we can find a way to properly rescue it. Just to give you a flavour of the difficult environment. That's our sort of key box where where the keys for the cabinets are. That's bold in the background. It really is in a terrible state of affairs. So here's inside the galleries. Now it actually looks all right. Looking at it in photographs, it doesn't seem quite so bad. But the problem is, and it's kind of what I was explaining earlier. There's 1,000 stories being told in there, and physically, you can just about get a buggy between some of those areas. It's overwhelming, full of information. It's apart from anything else. I also work on brands for museums, and there must be 50 different typefaces in there, and it just drives me crazy. But you can't really get a sense of the story. You can't really get a sense of these individual objects and just really have the sort of confidence to step back from 1,000 stories and just tell 5 or 10 stories in a space. Apart from the fact that the building's falling down, the building is going to go under a huge renovation. We've got the funding to do it, but it's a massive challenge. Now, most of the challenges are financial, but it's also a grade 2 listed building. So lots of our challenges are around doing the right thing for a grade 2 listed building. And that comes with more money, it comes with more time. It's one of the big challenges. And of course, people like English Heritage say, great, like restore it to a museum, but this is precisely how you've got to do it. And because it's a sort of Frankenstein building, the tower and the two wings, they don't really match, which we'll see in a second. Everything's too narrow. It wasn't built for a visitor experience, a museum experience. It was built for people doing office work on the harbour, and it didn't need to be particularly accessible for a museum. It has to be fundamentally accessible. So the building is the problem. And here's a couple of shots. This is in the sort of central, we call it the octagon room, the central tower of the building. And you can see they're both with different direction shots of the same room. So there's a little, the three steps, the steps up into the side gallery, and it does it on either side. It's about a 2-foot drop into the gallery. Now, in order for us to be compliant, to get a slope in there, or it's too small for a lift, but we can't build a slope because there's not enough. It's too narrow to put a slow enough slope in there, and also then it needs to go up the other side, and also the gap between the two is too narrow. So we're currently asking English Heritage, and this is where you're sort of juggling between wanting to comply with heritage and a traditional old building, and you want to keep it and preserve it. It's a piece of heritage by itself. But if you can't get people through the door, and if you can't get someone in a wheelchair from A to B, or with a buggy, or whatever it may be, the experience is lessened, and we can't tell our stories, and it starts to become a dysfunctional space rather than a functional space. The other photo is of the Meridian Line. We have everyone knows the Meridian Line in Greenwich. Ramsgate has its own Meridian Line, which is 5 odd minutes before Greenwich Meridian Line. And one of the solutions for so I'm dwelling on this because it's one of my bugbears. One of our solutions to dealing with that drop in height is, and because the architects, we'll put a lovely wooden floor straight through that, which is fine, except you lose the Meridian Line, and you lose half of the Meridian Line viewing window. So that story is then immediately compromised. So okay, well we can put a piece of glass in the floor so we can view the Meridian Line, or maybe we can bring the Meridian Line up. And actually yesterday, day before yesterday, I discovered that the Meridian Line, which I assumed was a piece of brass that had been there since the building was built, the brass was stolen a couple of years ago. Somebody prized it out of the floor, broke in, prized the piece of brass out of the floor, and that's a piece of wood painted brass color. And I didn't know that until just a couple of days ago. And the guy that told me, I was bringing some volunteers around who were going to help me do a curatorial audit. And he's the one that, and I thought, I wonder if he's the one who pinched it as well. You never know. But it's a piece of wood, and he, of course, he's furious. He said, we've lost a piece of our heritage, and it's true. The piece of brass that was on the floor or whatever it was is a piece of the heritage, but it's not like this. It's not like the Meridian Line was sort of dug up and that's why the building was there. And as a small aside, I used to be quite pleased. The Meridian Line in Greenwich, when you go to the Greenwich Observatory, particularly Americans, kind of thought that the observatory was built there because the Meridian Line was discovered. And then when I pointed out there's another 3 Meridian Lines to their left or to their right, they were quite disappointed. So it's a little bit the same with this. The brass is missing, so that's a piece of heritage that's missing. And for this guy, the story is absolutely ruined. But it's in the building. Perhaps in this example, it's slightly different than my object example. The story is in the building itself, not in that piece of brass. And we'll put a piece of brass, and hopefully the floor will be compromised. I don't know the answer to keeping the heritage of the building, the accessibility, and also that particularly important story. I don't know how that is all going to get juggled. It's one of the challenges. Another challenge is there's water ingress. We're on the harbour, we're on the foreshore, we're in a tidal foreshore. This is at the back of the building, and you can see there's been some repairs made, wholly inadequate repairs. It's like they've asked some local builder just to come do a bit of pointing. Seawater comes into that cellar area where the painting was that I showed earlier. And so not only have you got water ingress into the building, which evaporates off, you've also got, it's actually salt water coming into the building, and that's corrosive. If you've got any kind of collections, and it attacks all sorts of things, as well as causing environmental dangers for any objects that we have inside the building. So that's another big challenge, and sadly, currently, we're going to have to just cap the 2 rooms of the cellar are wonderful sort of domed stone environments, slightly small, but they're beautiful spaces, and we're going to just have to cap them off for maybe 5 years until we can get back to HLF and put out our little begging bowls and ask them for a very specific fund to open those spaces. But what that also means, just keeping with the challenges, it's a really small building as well. All the walls are this thick. Our physical space to move around is and to create the heritage stories is really limited. And now we're losing effectively a floor of the museum. It's annoying. Another challenge is sort of comes from outside, and I don't know if this is a little bit sort of Ramsgate sulking sometimes. We didn't ask for a museum. Lots of people say, and particularly social media is great for this kind of thing. What are you doing building a museum for? We don't. It's almost the subtext. We've let one go already. And you want to put it back. We've knocked it down once. We didn't ask for a museum, but it's a valid question. I love museums. That's what I've done all my career. But lots of people don't want museums, and lots of people would prefer the money that's going to be spent on this to be new housing or another hospital or schools or whatever it may be. Why are we building another museum? And so when I'm talking about it, I go back to the heritage and the importance of the past to inform the future. And that museum is somehow the storehouse through these objects. It's the storehouse of this knowledge, almost the sort of window on the past. And while the museum itself is so small and it can't tell all the stories, so we're sort of developing a mantra about it being bigger than just the building, just the walls. And this sort of, I can't call it a solution, because the solution, the unicycling thing is there's many solutions and there's many problems. But I do feel somehow, and I was trying to find something to blame thinking about this. I sort of blame the internet and how it just makes everybody so binary. We don't want a museum and a little bit like that. And it's also, I think we've all become a bit siloed, and then COVID has caused that as well. And I think we're all a little bit more inward facing than perhaps we used to be. And also Ramsgate has got this, its sort of main claim to fame, if you like, historically, is going through 2 world wars. Its position on the Kent coast, it did suffer quite a lot during both world wars, and that is a sort of very modern, raw heritage, if you like, for the. But I think we've lost in recent years. We've lost our moving parts, and so what I want to do, and this is the sort of, I don't even know if this is the sort of all change thing, the mantra of today. I want to say, that we reached much further beyond the bounds of what is effectively a very small building. So we reach into the town, and the work we do engages and brings everybody into the space. And that sounds slightly sort of a hippie thing to do. But if we've got any chance of engaging 20, 25-year-olds who A, have never been in a museum, and B, don't intend to go in a museum. And why would I go to a museum? That's where my dad hangs out. it's a sea change that you need. But if you can get them involved, and if you can get them down there and do stuff in the museum and put on an exhibition, and I say skateboarding, it's a too easy a thing to say, but to an exhibition that they could engage with, and that then starts to engage them with the broader story. Sorry, I should have gone into this. This is my image of our need to re-immerse ourselves in each other, and I think if the museum can reach beyond its four walls, its fairly small, strange four walls, the ambition for me through the collections is to get everybody's moving parts back together and somehow sort of create a movement around that, a metaphorical movement and a physical movement. And I just want to end, oh God, that doesn't cover up the title. I just want to end, we started with my fabulous piece of art and my little Banksy thing at the beginning. I wanted to end with this gorgeous painting. This is Holidaymakers on the Beach at Ramsgate, painted in the 1850s. You can just see the clockhouse tower opening up on the left-hand side. Actually, Ramsgate hasn't changed. All of these buildings are pretty much still here. It's just pre-railway. This I think, if I get my perspective right, this is roughly where the railway station was, not even 10 years later. And the reason I picked this, it sort of exemplifies, if you like, what I achieve with the museum. I ended from reading the Great Wise Wikipedia, where I found this image. Apparently, when this was painted or when it was first publicly displayed, one of the reason it was lambasted or criticized was because that it shows several classes together, different financial groups all together on the beach, different cultural groups all mixing, and it was considered a bad thing to do. But that's kind of the opposite what I want the museum to do. It needs to bring everybody from every strata of society, from all age groups, everybody together, all on the sort of metaphorical beach, if you like. And let's all I wanted to get all our feet wet together and somehow build something with this new museum. That's me. I'm done. Thank you very much.